How's it going, everyone? Paul with Adaptable Survival. What I want to do in today's episode is going over creating the fast fire, as well as some of the resources we collect to make this happen. Stick with me as we dive into it. So in this episode, like I said, we are going to talk about collecting fire resources, which we'll be doing here in a minute, as I'll throw those clips in here and then build up to the end. What I want to accomplish with this video is show you some resources that can be collected off the landscape to be added to stuff that you carry in your kit to build what I like to call a fast fire. Call it whatever you want. You're just getting a fire going really quickly at the end of the day. So this video is really geared towards building that fire fast and efficiently with the gear that we carry, whether we're backpacking, camping, or just going out for the day. So let's dive into collecting some resources out the landscape. So undoubtedly, when you start researching survival skills, outdoor skills, starting fires, anything like that, you're bound to come across the discussion of birch bark as an accelerant. And why that is because of the oil that is contained in birch bark. Now there's a few different varieties out there, and it's all dependent on your geographical area and what grows there commonly. Here in Wisconsin, at least in the northern half of the state, we have a lot of this paper birch. It's spread all throughout the state, or at least in my area, in the areas that I frequent. So I can find this pretty regularly, and you don't necessarily need a lot of it. As you see, I collected a very small handful here because of that oil is going to act, if you want to think about it in simpler terms, as a gasoline. So once you add that into your fire lay, flames hit that, it's going to give you more combustion, more heat to get that fire going. Now I'm just behind the camera here, so apologies if it's a little bit louder. But as you can see, I didn't grab a ton of this birch bark because that oil is so powerful when you add that to other fire materials. And the great thing with birch bark, even if this is wet, you can still get it to go as long as that flame comes in contact with the bark itself. Now, another resource I want to talk about now that we're kind of close to kind of a decent source of it. As we can see right across this creek here, we have dry grass all throughout that open field over there. Now, grass is really great because you can add volume to your fire lay and have a better chance of getting that fire to go. Now, there's some things to be aware of when it comes to collecting grass. As we can see, I have a creek flowing through here. So this grass that's closer to me, I was just out here last week and it was up to where I'm standing here. So I know, since I'm in this area a lot, that the water rises and drops consistently. So this grass that's here, although the stuff at the very top is dry, that stuff underneath can be wet, and that can go throughout that grass. The other thing you want to keep in mind, if you do collect grass to add volume to that fire lay, there's a waxy coating on the outside of grass. If we look at it, it's got like that hay-like appearance. And if you've ever handled hay, the outside almost feels waxy. So what has to happen as that fire is growing, it has to burn that outer waxy coating off before that dry inner material starts to ignite. Something to keep in mind when you are collecting grasses off of the landscape. And fall, spring are all really great times to collect that stuff because there's abundance of dead grasses and plant life around. Now, just in this area that we've been looking at, the birch bark, the dry grasses, we do have some dry leaves, or dead leaves I should say. These ones are a little damp now that I'm feeling them. But you can see these branches here, and there's some more off in the woods here. Now, when you're looking at these, there's various trees that will keep some of their leaves throughout winter, even though they're dead. And a term that I heard throughout my training, these were called ghost leaves, basically because they're dead and they're just hanging out there. Now, the thing with leaves, if you're adding that to your fire lay and adding that as a fire resource material off of the landscape, it's going to be a flash tinder. Now what that means is it's going to ignite and burn extremely fast. Now that's not to say that's going to be a bad resource to use. You just have to be mindful of that as you're stockpiling resources to get a fire going. Now, the thing I always like to try and do is stockpile as many resources as possible. So if, like in this particular situation, I have that little bit of birch bark, I could grab some grass if it was dry, and then I could grab some of these leaves as well. Now, I'm continually adding volume and various ignition, ignitable, I should say, sources to that fire lay to really get that fire going quick and efficiently. Here, it's just a close-up of what these leaves will look like. As we can see, if I can get these to focus, they're dead. But these ones, with some of the rain we've gotten in the last couple days, are a little damp, so I'm not going to collect these, but I still wanted to talk about them since they were here. As we're walking down the trail, I did see these ones as well. So we can see that multiple trees will keep some of their leaves even when they die off in the winter. Now, with the resources that we've come across thus far, it's not meant to be an exhaustive list of every single kind of resource that you can find out there. These are 3 pretty common ones. The birch bark is going to be really dependent on where you're located, but you can typically find dry grasses and dry leaves, which will add volume to your fire lay. So leading me into our next portion of this video is we're going to collect ourselves some kindling and some fuel, since we already have our tinder sources off the landscape. Plus I have my pre-made tinders that I always carry in my kit. So with this location that I'm currently at, this is an old cedar grove. As I walk all throughout here, there's tons of dead cedar, plenty of dead branches all over the place for me to collect. But primarily what we're going to focus on is the one that's under the foliage above me, leading to all these dead branches that are hanging on the bottom side here. Now, typically when I'm telling students to collect kindling, smalls, however you want to word that resource, you want stuff that is about pencil size and smaller to get that initial fire going. Once you have that fire going, you want anything thumb size and larger to continually build up till, I mean, you're throwing big old redwoods on there if that's really what you want to do. So when you're collecting this stuff, now at the school, when we're teaching classes, fill up a big contractor bag. I don't do that in my personal time. I don't know how many people do, but it's a good representation of how much you're going to need to really get that fire going. It's a good learning tool. But when you're collecting, and I'll try and zoom in here in a second, you want to find branches that are roughly about thumb size and has everything smaller that you want. So as I'm zoomed in up on these branches here, we can see that there's tons of smaller branches coming off one of these big ones here. So what you're going to want to do is reach up in here, and I'll go for this one here, even though it doesn't have a ton of smalls, and you hear that audible snap. That's what you want to find. You don't want a slight snap, you don't want a little bit of a snap, you want a nice audible crisp snap. Now this, let me get in here and get this to focus a little bit. So now if we look at the branches that are coming off this, some of these are a little bigger than we want, but it's a good representation of what we're looking for, because you can see This one here, not quite the width of my finger, a little bit beefier than a pencil, but as you go down that branch, everything starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller up until you have this piece here that's about the size of a piece of pencil lead. So something I want to point out, so we see this brush pile here. Now, this could be or not be a good resource depending on what the weather has been currently. Last couple of days, it's rained here, so a lot of stuff is wet. Let me grab some of this. Yeah, this has a little bit of a snap, but I can feel just by touching this that it's got a little bit of dampness, so I'm not going to waste my time collecting off something like this because I'm going to be combating that dampness in the wood itself. That also goes for collecting any sticks off of the ground, since water's collecting all across the ground in various pools and amounts. You don't want to grab that for your fire resource. You're always going to want to go to the branches hanging in the air because that breeze that's coming through is continually drying them out. So now I've collected up my resources. So I have the birch bark I collected, as well as a pretty good sized chunk that I found on the walk-in on the ground, just to highlight that you can use that damp birch bark to get a fire going. Then I grabbed just enough smalls, you know, pencil size, smaller, with a little bit of stuff that's close to thumb size. And as I've said in a previous video in the fire starting in this outdoor skills series, I always have some quick tinder tabs with me because these are nice, compact, and I know for sure that I always have at least some sort of dry tinder to get my fire going. All right, so all I did now was break down my remaining smalls into a little bit more manageable pieces based off the size of this fire pit. You don't have to break them down this small. I just did that so I don't have a bunch of extra sticks hanging outside of the fire pit that I have to constantly scoop in to the middle here, since I'm not trying to start a fire that's going to last me all night, just to show you how quickly we can get this going. Now, if you think back to an earlier video in this series when I spoke of ignition sources, I said my Bic lighter is always going to be my #1 choice because I can flick it, have that instant flame. Cold weather, you want to make sure that this stays inside your pocket so it's close to your body, or in an inner chest pocket so it constantly stays warm, because you can run into some issues when this is cold. Discussion for another video. But now I have that V fire lay set up, have the birch bark, have my platform. Now I'm just going to take my tinder quick tab or whatever pre-made tinder source that you carry with you, and I'm just going to fluff this a little bit. Since I'm using a lighter, I don't have to fluff it a bunch, but I like to start building habits because they become muscle memory and you just do them automatically and never have to think about it. And now hit that with the flame, get that going, place that right in the middle of that birch bark, and you see how quickly that ignited. Now I just take my smalls, not caring how I have them situated over that fire, and now see how quickly that fire goes up with that birch bark as an accelerant to that fire lay. And just like that, minute, maybe two, that fire is already going, and I can continually add to it. So as we can see, within 10 minutes, you can get a very sustainable fire going. Now, one of the joys of shooting YouTube is obviously the first take usually is never the one that you go with. So I had to come through throwing a little bit more wood in here to kind of get it going. But this is all based off of that very first fire lay that we created today. Now, this video isn't meant to be an all-inclusive how-to fire starting kit, you know, everything with fire lays, everything with fire resources. This was meant to show you, with the kit that you carry and some resources off the landscape, you can build a quick and efficient fast fire in a matter of minutes. Now, within 10 minutes, I have a raging fire that I can continually add to go all night if I needed to, or like today, just for the afternoon. Do me a favor down in the comment section down below. Let me know what fire lays you enjoy using to get your fires going. As always, you know, I love seeing that engagement down in the comment section, because that's how we grow, by starting conversations, exploring topics, seeing what works, what doesn't work. That's how we all benefit from each other. Do me a favor, hit that like and subscribe as well, as it gets more eyes on what we're doing here in the community that we're building. Helps bring those folks in with their knowledge so we can add that to our knowledge base and learn together and grow together. As always, this has been Paul with Adaptable Survival. Adapt your mind, your body, and your gear.